Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the staff meeting, Sedgwick County Commission staff meeting, Tuesday, August 10th. So it's 9 o'clock in the morning. Hand it over to the county manager.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. We have two topics we're going to talk about today at staff. The first will be a discussion regarding fleet and centering around heavy fleet, trucks, tractors, and Andrew Diltz is here today to talk about that along with Jim Weber, who's our county engineer. And then our second topic will be a discussion about Health Advisory Board. And Mike Papoon and Tim Kaufman will lead that discussion. So we'll start with fleet, and Andrew, sir, you're up.
Good morning, Commissioners. Andrew Diltz, Acting Fleet Director. I have a small PowerPoint here just to give a brief overview and history of our fleet operation. So our fleet shop is divided into two shops. We have a light side and a heavy side. The light side services cars, SUVs, pickups, ambulances, and they have approximately 394 pieces of equipment that they service or take care of. The heavy side services dump trucks, excavators, wheel and track loaders, dozers, motor graders, construction rollers, cranes. There's a wide variety over there, and they have about 372 pieces of equipment they service. Back in 2017, Fleet moved forward with a 15-point replacement plan. The vehicles, essentially, I view this as a guideline that the vehicles would need to be approaching this 15-point or achieve the 15 points in order for them to be looked at for replacement. 15 points are made up of 5 points in maintenance or repair costs. There are 5 points for mileage or hours on the equipment, and there is 5 points due to age of the equipment. Each piece of equipment, depending on how it's categorized, has a certain amount of miles or hours that's assigned to it to get to those 5 points. And then they also have a certain amount of age that's dedicated to it to get to the other 5 points. And then we have about 5 dump trucks that have reached the 15 points. And of those 5, 3 of those trucks were picking up metal shards in the engine oil analysis, and they're recommending that we do an overhaul of those trucks. Because those trucks have reached a point to where the drivetrain and the engine are pretty much exhausted, we don't know that it's worth putting the money into overhauling these trucks, and we're looking to replace them sooner than later. At some point this year, we're going to put a proposal before you to replace those 3 trucks, 3 out of the 5. In the beginning of next year, we're going to be looking to replace at least the other 2, if not more, depending on where we're at with our point system and how those trucks are looking at the beginning of the year. So, in addition to that, the trucks that we're going to be asking for when that proposal comes before you are going to be a little bit heavier truck. It's going to be the same gross vehicle weight rating, but the engine is going to be a higher horse. It's going to have higher foot-pounds of torque. Transmission will be increased in size. The drivetrain itself will be a larger size, larger capacity. And the goal there is that these trucks will go a little bit longer before they're needing this kind of work or this kind of money to invest in the maintenance and the repair costs. And I will stand for any questions if we have any questions over the dump trucks.
Okay. Any questions? Commissioner Dennis?
Well, thank you, Andrew, and thanks to Jim and the folks over at Fleet for taking a look at this program. My main concern has always been we want to make sure that that the people that do the job for us have the equipment that they need in order to be able to accomplish the mission. That's priority. Second priority is to make sure that we protect the interest of our taxpayers and we do what's right for them. and we don't turn in equipment prematurely that may still have usable life on it. So I appreciate everybody taking a look at this. I think that it is a great idea that we're looking at a better quality vehicle. The difference between a Yugo and a Chevrolet is miles, so the difference between what kind of a vehicle that we buy for heavy equipment makes a big difference too on how long that it's going to last. So some things that we were looking at in the past was, if we start taking a vehicle down because of maintenance costs, because of oil changes, tires, and so forth, that's not really one of the major issues involved in a piece of equipment. So we're counting things against a piece of equipment that probably aren't valid. And the same with age. I know that Public Works may have some cranes and some vehicles out over there that we don't use too often. We have to have them. When we need them, we need them. But age may not be a valid requirement for getting rid of a piece of equipment. So I appreciate the fact that you're going through and reviewing what it takes to replace it. I know that the taxpayers appreciate you taking a look at making sure that what we're doing is the right thing. But we all know that if you buy a good piece of equipment, it's going to last longer. So unfortunately, a lot of times we go with the cheapest bid, and we get what we deserve sometimes when we don't get a piece of equipment that's going to last. So again, I don't have any problem at all with reviewing how that we're purchasing equipment. Once we get our oil analysis back and we find out that that engine is starting to fail, and you can tell exactly which parts are failing by what pieces of metal are in that oil, then we need to start thinking about moving on to a different vehicle, and I have no problem with that. So again, I thank you very much for your time and effort on working this issue. I know that I bug you on it occasionally, and it's not because I don't think you're not doing a good job. It's because I want to make sure that we do the things that I started out speaking about, that you have the equipment in order to be able to accomplish the mission, and we watch the taxpayers' money. So thank you very much.
Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of questions. Thank you for bringing this to us today. But we talked the other day, and you mentioned it was about $80,000 to fix one of these trucks. Is that still the number that we think is correct?
We still need to look into that number some more. I think there might have been some more items done to that truck outside of just overhauling the truck at that cost. We're still looking into that, but I don't have those numbers in front of me today.
Okay. So I think we need to know that that's the correct number, because I think it helps us make the right decision. And again, I don't know how many do we know on these 5 trucks. Do we have the mileage? I think you said it's around 250,000 miles in each of these trucks.
The point system is set up so that we're replacing these trucks at 250,000 miles. I have it with me here. The mileage on these trucks are not reaching the 250,000 mile threshold. So we have a truck that's needing an overhaul. The 3 trucks that need overhauls, one has 137,000 miles, one has 132,000 miles, and the other one has 111,000 miles. And that is feeding into our argument to increase the size of the motor and the drivetrain, because we believe these trucks are hitting their exhaustion before they're hitting our thresholds at what we want to replace them at.
So these trucks are fairly are they newer trucks as well?
All 3 trucks are 2010s, so they're 11-year-old trucks.
I'll just share one of my thoughts on this. And again, when I first became a commissioner, we basically went by age and miles only. And I think you could hit either one of those thresholds that would trigger essentially a desire to replace a truck when it was a certain age or certain miles. And I think there was some frustration because I think that in the private sector, there appears to be a lot longer life on these trucks than what the county was given these trucks. And so there was some discussion about trying to make this more objective I should say, maybe use some other criteria. So now I think now it's age and miles, in addition to maintenance costs. And I think it's a step in the right direction. But the 15-point system, in my opinion, kind of misses one of the points I think that needs to be maybe brought back into the discussion. That is, you might find a vehicle that's in really good condition, that has a lot of miles on it, that has an appearance that it would go another year or two pretty easily. Maybe another vehicle doesn't have as many miles or is not as old, but maybe it's got other more significant problems. And so this is a good example where these ones have, maybe some pending engine failure type of stuff. So what I think we ought to do right now is have maybe a different discussion about maybe abandoning the 15-point system. And I think that we need to move towards what I consider to be a qualified assessment. A qualified assessment, in my opinion, is where you have a couple of mechanics that are gifted on this type of equipment that would essentially do like a 100-point inspection, like you might see in the done in the private sector, and they would essentially grade the vehicle and come out with a qualified opinion on whether the vehicle has life left in it or not. And again, the phrase I like to use that provides a balance between the taxpayer's desire to not buy new equipment and our desire to have dependability and have good quality equipment is the idea of wearing it out safely. We want dependability and we want vehicles that can do their job. Obviously, we don't want to fail in the mission of what these things are purchased to do. But at the end of the day, if we sell something too early, then we've made a mistake essentially on behalf of the taxpayers. If we hold on to it too long and it ends up failing in its mission, we end up with a problem with providing services to Sedgwick County. So either case, there's a very fine balance of trying to maintain the idea that we can keep things as long as possible, and as long as they're dependable and safe, and they can accomplish the mission, then we ought to keep them to that point. But there's a point where you need to obviously replace that equipment. So I think the idea of a qualified assessment would be a better way to go. And my thought would be have someone in the private sector essentially provide that, one side of the assessment and the other side by someone who's on staff that can do it for us. And you would probably average the two ideas together and see, do they agree that the vehicle has life or not? And if they disagree, then I think it provides essentially maybe some discussion about why. So I think a qualified assessment would be better than a 15-point system. I agree with Commissioner Dennis that the normal maintenance costs should not be considered in this, and the age by itself doesn't make a lot of sense. I'll argue, I guess, mileage by itself doesn't make a lot of sense either. So I think the qualified assessment is a better system. So I agree with Commissioner Dennis. I think you need to get the equipment that you need. I'll support the plan to do the three and the three this year and two next year, assuming that we have the fleet funds to do that. And if not, I guess we'll find a way to move money if we have to. But I believe that we obviously need to get the equipment we need. But I guess going forward, I would like to have a discussion about maybe moving away from the 15-point system. So that's my desire. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
If I may address a couple of those items. We're still working with budget to try to see what we can do this year. It may not be something within the next month or two. It may be something closer towards November that we get something actually in front of you to vote on. As far as the point system goes, out of those 5 trucks I mentioned, the 2 trucks that we're not keeping, the 2 trucks that we are keeping in our fleet, one has 17 points and the other one has 19.4. So these trucks are hitting their points. They're going beyond their points. We're having conversations with the department that operates those trucks, Public Works. Public Works is talking with their drivers and their operators. We're talking to our mechanics. There's a lot of conversation that happens internally. We aren't going outside to a third party to help us evaluate the trucks. It's all in-house. But there are some conversations that are happening in-house, and we're not just replacing the equipment because we get to that 15-point system, but it is a good guideline that's got us to the point that we are today.
I appreciate that. I just want to say, I know that there's some folks that are frustrated because they see a vehicle that's not dependable, that hasn't hit 15 points for some reason. So, and otherwise you might have a vehicle that's well beyond 15 points that appears to have life left in it, but it kind of triggers a replacement. So, the subjective analysis a little bit again. So, adding some subjectivity into this, I think, is naturally not a bad thing in this case. So, all right, but I do appreciate that clarification.
Okay, can you, in 2017, when this 15-point replacement plan was done, was it a vote of the commission at the time, or was it just a recommendation by the staff?
I believe what happened was that the commission wanted to do something different than just go off of age and mileage, and staff came up with the 15-point replacement plan and presented it to the commission.
Is there a document or minutes about how that was done and who signed off and everything else on that?
I don't know that I,
Okay. Maybe
back and look.
we can work on that later. I'd just like to see how we got to arrive at that and what the opinions were at that time. Thank you. Commissioner Cruz?
Oh, thank you, Chairman. It's funny you ask that because I asked for that last week. Is there a way that we could get that?
We'll look. I can't recall. It was 2017. I don't know if we did it in a staff meeting or if we did it in a vote in a commission meeting. I think it was staff meeting, but we'll research that.
Okay, thanks. Anything else? Nope. Okay. Okay. Commissioner Lopez? Okay, all right. All right, thank you. We will move forward. I don't see any other questions. Okay, Tom, next up.
Now we'll shift gears and go to Health Advisory Board discussion, and Tim will be at the podium, and Mike will kind of go historically of what happened with the advisory board earlier, several years ago, and then we can have discussion after that.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, County Commissioners, Mike Papoon, County Councilor. Akeem just handed you 3 documents that I thought might be useful for a little background, and I'll get into each of these documents, 2 resolutions and some minutes from a meeting on December 7th, 2005. I'm going to give a brief overview of kind of the role of the advisory board, or the history of the Advisory Board of Health and the history of just the Board of Health in general. Statutes as far back as 1943 have been in place which allow cities and counties to have a joint Board of Health. Statute specific to Sedgwick County, which at that time was a population of over 250,000, was adopted in 1961. In 1981, the city adopted a charter ordinance which provided for an 11-member Board of Health, 5 appointments by the city of Wichita, which included an MD and a veterinarian, and 5 appointments by Sedgwick County, which included a dentist and a nurse, and 1 at that time by the administrative judge. In 1992, city adopted a new charter ordinance, and this time it was a 14-member board, 7 members appointed by the city and 7 by the county, which also included the same medical personnel appointments as provided prior to that. In 2001, following the merger and Sedgwick County taking over a good portion of the health department for the county and the city, the county adopted a charter ordinance 54, which at that time then appointed the county commission as the Board of Health as part of that merger. And once Charter 54 was adopted and the county commission became the Board of Health, of course, then we had the advisory, or we had the existing Board of Health that was appointed by the city and county that we had to do something with. So the first document you have is resolution number 188, 2001, excuse me, which provided and established an advisory Board of Health and setting out the number of members, qualifications, and appointments, and so on. And the Advisory Board of Health there's also language in which essentially grandfathered in those people that were already sitting on the Board of Health, if they had done that, or been appointed prior to January 1 of 2002. As you can see through this resolution, it provides for the 14 members. There were 4 medical appointments, I believe, in this resolution. There have been 10 at-large members appointed. The responsibilities of this board were set out in Section 4, and those responsibilities including advising the Sedgwick County Board of Health and health officers on matters of policy and procedure regarding matters of health for the residents of Sedgwick County. They would make recommendations concerning operational policies and procedures for the Sedgwick County Board of Health. They could advise the county manager on spending priorities, and at the request of the Sedgwick County Board of Health or the health officer, the board could review specific health-related problems or situations or programs in the county. They look at codes, resolutions, and such other further responsibilities as the Board of Health would request at that particular time. So that was adopted in December of 2001. Very early in 2002, the second resolution you have shows, which essentially grandfathered most of these members in, that shows the appointments officially appointed by resolution to members of the Advisory Board of Health at that time. As you can see, that in this particular resolution, you had 2 MDs, 1 doctor of veterinary medicine, 4 nurses, and then we had 1 dentist. Was also appointed as part of that resolution. And then the last document I've given you, so the Advisory Board of Health was created in late 2001. I've given you the regular minutes of the meeting of the Board of County Commissioners on December 7th, 2005. The agenda item at that time was a resolution to dissolve the Sedgwick County Advisory Board of Health. Ms. Claudia Blackburn, who was the director of the health department at that particular time, was recommending to the county commissioners that because they were having trouble getting a quorum, because I think the Advisory Board of Health was searching for a purpose and mission and such, and didn't feel that it had appropriate direction at that time, they felt that the health department itself could provide the medical and health expertise needed for the county commission sitting as the Board of Health, and that you didn't need an Advisory Board of Health. And as you can see down, and the questions were raised about, well, who would be giving appropriate advice to the county commissioners as the Board of Health. And Ms. Blackburn at that time talked about all the different working groups they had. They had a Health and Wellness Coalition, Tobacco-Free Wichita Coalition, Pandemic Influenza Work Group, and so on, that were staffed by members of the health department with the help of other outside citizens and members of the medical community. Anyway, there was a discussion that you had before you at that time, and at the end of that discussion, I believe it was unanimous to, at that time, dissolve the Advisory Board of Health. And that's where we sit today, and I'll let Tim talk about his role and the need and how other communities have used the Advisory Board of Health.
So we've looked across the state, and in Kansas, it's typical that the Board of County Commissioners sits and acts as the Board of Health. There are a few communities where there's an advisory board that provides some of the same functions that Mike described to the health officer and to the Board of Health. Not very many, though. It's a limited number. Some of the characteristics that you see in the communities that do have an advisory board of health, there's somewhere between 7 and 15 members. No more than a third generally are physicians. Some include a veterinarian or a dentist or both. They include some of the allied health professionals like occupational therapists or physical therapists, RNs. But the characteristic that we noticed as we looked at some of the existing advisory boards is that they're made up of a majority by customers of the health department. So the folks that are actually receiving services at the health department make up the majority of the slots in a given advisory board. And then there are other interested citizens that make up the final membership. Meetings are quarterly, some are more frequent than that. And the most important functions that they provide is that they offer, they participate in the community health assessment, they gain a deeper understanding of the health department, how it operates, and then they provide that some feedback back to the commission based on their perspectives, either as a customer or as a healthcare provider. And then they participate in the community health improvement plan development, and most importantly, they champion that plan in the community. So it's not just health department staff that are talking about the community health improvement plan, but we've got citizens across the community. And the other thing that's really important that we've identified, that we've noticed in other places that are using advisory boards, is that the advisory board needs to be reflective of the community and the type of people that are receiving services from the health department. So it needs to be a broad cross-section of the community to make up that Board of Health. So not only do you have health experts on the board, but you've got health consumers as well. And so you get a mix, and any advice that you would then receive from them, or the health department or Dr. Minns would receive, would be from a number of different perspectives, because as we've discovered through the last 18 months, there's a lot of different perspectives on public health, and all of them, if you're going to get advice, you should get it from all different perspectives. So those are the things that we've noticed in other advisory boards across both Kansas, and we've looked at some other communities that have them as well. So those are the general characteristics.
That's the presentation? Okay. Any questions, comments? Okay. Commissioner Cruz?
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Papoon, there was an article that is not here that you provided to me a while back, and it had a timeline. I mean, it broke out every single bit of discussion on the Board of Health, and I wonder if there's a way that you could produce that for all of us. I have to go back and look through my stack. Do you remember giving that to me?
I barely remember what I did yesterday most of the time, but I'm sure I've given a lot of documents, Commissioners. I bet it's in this file right here, and I'll go through it, and we can discuss after the meeting.
I mean, you laid out a pretty good timeline, but I just wondered if we could have that. That's my comment for now. I guess my mic wasn't on the whole time, so sorry about that, public.
It's all right. Okay. Commissioner Lopez?
Thank you so much. So I've been trying to learn about these advisory boards and really the best way to kind of set one up. And I do have some ideas on what an advisory board could look like for a health department. And this is not in any way what it has to look like, but it's just kind of my opinion on a good way forward. And I try to really look at this from multiple perspectives, but I would love to hear feedback from you guys and really see what we could do for this. So when I looked at these advisory boards, I saw about 15 to 20 was an average number for an advisory board of this group. So if we did something similar to that, I looked at even like Glenda's boards for corrections, where she chooses people and then we appoint them at large. And so taking into account some of the spaces that people, that are held on these other advisory boards around Kansas, or ones that we used to look at, and that's kind of how I came up with these. But so 4 customers that the health department chooses, I think they need to reflect, just like what Tim was saying, what our customers of the health department actually look like, and make sure that that's a true reflection of them. And then 5 medical people that the health department also picks, and we can choose what backgrounds they could come from, so we could have 5 different ideas and not just the same viewpoint, like 5 family medicine physicians. I don't think it's going to be as helpful unless we get 5 different backgrounds. So, but then I was also thinking, because the business community, I think, needs to have a voice at this too. And so if we all had our own choice for a business person to have on this board, so we can have medical and commerce as well represented. But then if we do want to make that even more, then we can go in and bring in like the Class 1 cities, or school board representative, or a superintendent, or someone from WSU, or some, bring in that education piece too. And that way we're really all kind of at the table having these conversations. And this doesn't necessarily have to be out of COVID that we need to make this, but just because, so many departments have advisory boards, and I think our health department would like that as well. And so this would be, I think, good policy just going forward, even, way beyond any pandemic, but just looking at really what our health department needs, and and helping them along the way. I do think that they could advise us in certain situations. I mean, the pandemic is not something we're usually in, so I think it would be helpful to get a large variety of input on some of those, but I do think it's just a smart policy going forward, as many of our departments have advisory boards. So that's kind of where I'm at with this. But again, those people that I listed don't have to be exactly what we do, but I do think it's a good starting point. So I would like to hear, I guess, opinions from anyone who thinks that they could make that better, but I would really like to see us provide Adrian and that department some support, because when we disbanded this advisory board before, I mean, she listed everything they had. Our health department was pretty robust. And it's not just Sedgwick County that health departments, across the nation have been, a lot of the funding has been taken away over, the past decade or so. And I think it's important to realize that when they got rid of it before, because there wasn't as much for them to do, they had tobacco-free Wichita Coalition, they had Health and Wellness Coalition, they have a pandemic influenza work group, they worked on medical issues on a different board, they had suicide prevention task forces. I mean, there's so much that they had that we just don't have now. And so I do think there's plenty of work to be done well beyond COVID, and really just looking at what our community needs and the support that our health department needs as well. So that's really all I have for this, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
Okay. Any thoughts? Commissioner Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner. One correction, there is still a Health and Wellness Coalition. I invited you to attend that, so that does still exist. But I've been on record saying I don't oppose some type of an advisory board for the Board of Health. I've said that several times. The only major stipulation I put on that is that the final authority comes down to the Board of Health, because we're elected, and an advisory board is not elected. So it still has to be someone that's responsible to the people that makes the final decision. And whoever we appoint has to understand that there is also a public portion of this thing that's not necessarily medical. And so we'll make decisions that maybe the medical community does not agree with, but the public wants us to go that direction. So again, I don't have a problem with that. I'm not sure that in the middle of a pandemic is the time to start setting this thing up. Hopefully we can work through this thing in the near future and start thinking about it. Whatever we do won't happen tomorrow. It's going to take a little bit of time, but again, as I said, I'm not opposed to it. Thank you.
No? Okay. Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we have minutes for the meetings that happened back in 2001 through 2005? Can we go back and get the minutes from those meetings and get them available to commissioners?
I don't know who you're addressing the
I
question
don't know.
to, Commissioner, but we can certainly, I'll certainly have our office look and see if we can find the minutes for those meetings. It's probably something that I think in accordance with the resolution you had before you, the health department and the health officer were supposed to kind of staff and assist that board. So it's probably whether or not the health department at that time was taking those minutes, and we'll certainly check into it for you.
Okay, I think that would be good to find out kind of how it worked when they did have this advisory board. And second question, I guess I'd like to see how the health department funding has changed since 2001. If we can dig up that data, that'd be good to kind of see how that has happened. I'll just say that through this pandemic, that we have had plenty of folks in the medical community and otherwise have come and shared their thoughts and opinions with the county commission, and I think that we were very glad to have their voices. I'm a little bit concerned about the idea that someone from a school system can represent the viewpoint of all school systems, or that someone in any vocation, frankly, can provide, if you will, a perspective of everybody in that career field. So, as much as it sounds like if you have one perspective that that represents if essentially a career field. It might be the average opinion of everybody in that career field, but it may not be. And I think that even in the pandemic discussions we've had even this week, it was stated that all school systems want to have standardized policy. And I know for sure that can't be true because some of them reached out to me and said that that's not what they agree with. They don't want to be standardized. And so I think that we need to be very careful not to assume that an advisory board essentially represents all viewpoints, because I don't think it does. Secondly, an advisory board is just that. I think the discussion actually works better in front of the Board of Health if the advisory board has the discussion privately, I should say. So I'm sure it's an open meeting, but I don't know if the commissioners are going to be attending that or listening to it. They have a very lengthy and detailed discussion at the advisory board level and bring their findings back to the commission. We don't have the depth of understanding. We simply take their conclusions. I don't know if that's as good as having the full discussion in front of the BOCC. And I think that full discussion is good for the public to hear it and see it and have commissioners essentially discuss those things as it comes to us. And again, having that full discussion is really a good thing. And so I would say I think we're very I would invite the business community and invite the medical community and the citizens of Sedgwick County to share their thoughts and opinions on any of these policy ideas. But when you put it to an advisory board, I think you actually miss potentially some of the discussion. So I'm not sure that's better. And I think that the fact that we actually have some history of going through this process, developing this advisory board and then getting rid of the advisory board is very noteworthy. I don't know why we have to keep changing things back and forth. I guess my final comment would be this. Kansas is a very interesting state in that we have a lot of government in Kansas. And I think that if we just continue to create more and more and more positions, advisory boards is a good example. I don't know how many advisory boards do we have, Tom? Do you know? A lot. And the city has a lot. And to continue to create more advisory boards, in a sense, it provides some, it does provide some good things, obviously, but it also, sometimes we go against the advisory board, there's offenses. Lonnie the plumber's in the audience. I'm thinking about Lonnie. And the advisory board gives us their thoughts, and we don't agree with what the advisory board does. It creates an offense, essentially. They want to have some assurance that we're going to follow what the advisory board tells us to do. So that doesn't always happen, and I think that the elected officials that answer to the people have to have the ability to essentially do what we hear other voices. We hear lots of input from different sources. We have different perspective. Potentially. So I think that we make the best decision we can, but ultimately we answer to the people, and we have to have the right to make that decision. So if we had this advisory board through this pandemic, and if they would have essentially done what Dr. Menz did, make recommendations or make health orders and that type of thing, if we would have opposed that at the time, I don't know what type of consequence that would create. So I'm a little concerned about what the role of an advisory board might be misunderstood, that they become an authority. And they're not an authority, they would still be an advisory board. So I'm a little concerned about that. And so this discussion today, I don't really know why we're having this discussion right now. I guess I would like someone to explain to me what the problem is we're trying to solve. That would be helpful maybe a starting, if we're going to seriously consider this, what problems are we trying to fix with changing things back to what we had before? Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Cruz?
Thank you, Chairman. So we can go back and forth about dump trucks, but we can't go back and forth about a health advisory board. Why do we have any advisory boards at all if we aren't going to consider an advisory board that will help us make health decisions in the middle of a pandemic? When we talk about having one person represent an entire cohort of people on an advisory board, we do it with our electrical board. We do it with all sorts of boards. So to say that we can't do it with one, but we can do it with the other, that's where I don't understand. Can you help me understand why we can do it with one, but we can't do it with the other? Advisory boards,
are designed to advise. I mean, I don't want to have to reiterate that. We have them for all sorts of things. If we go to our county, we have them for the Juvenile Corrections Advisory Board. We have a grievance board. We have a community corrections, a county, we have a, let me just go to the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission Board. What if we dissolved that and brought it back to here? I mean, we have these boards for a purpose. And when you talk about the Board of Health, when you have 5 elected folks up here, we should be advised by those who have an industry knowledge of what health policies should be created. These people focus on these kinds of things. So I understand that, you know, when we're having these discussions, it's important to question things. I get that. But we have important decisions to make, and we need to be advised by those who have done the research, who are knee-deep in all of these things every single day to tell us the best decisions to make. I don't understand why it's okay to go back and forth about a 15-point dump truck system, but we're talking about reiterating a health board that affects people's lives every day, and you don't understand why we're having the conversation in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, I don't get that. Can you explain that, Commissioner Howell? I mean, let's have a conversation about this. You're okay with dump trucks going back and forth between buying a vehicle, but people's lives, you don't understand why we're talking about this?
I'd be glad to respond if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
I'd love for you to respond.
So we have not found a solution on the 15-point system. We've not found a fleet management tool that I think works great. We're still searching for a better tool. And I think the discussion is we're essentially, we tried out 15-point system, and we can continue that. That's one option. But I think we ought to challenge ourselves to find a better way. And we've never tried a qualified assessment of our fleet vehicles. I think it's something we have to take a look at. The private sector does it, and it works pretty well. As I said before, I welcome the voices in front of the BOCC, but the public, I think, deserves, especially when it comes to Board of Health, and we're trying to regulate people, essentially limit their freedom to some degree. The people deserve to have that discussion and have the full access to all of the discussion that is happening. And those experts in the communities that want to come forward, we invite them all. And we're not limiting the discussion to an advisory board member. So again, I would invite those folks in to talk to the Board of Health or the BOCC every time we have a policy discussion that impacts the public. I think that we want to hear from all voices. An advisory board member, in my opinion, has an opportunity on that board to develop, if you will, an advisory board position, but I mean, it doesn't have the same public consumption that it would have if it was in front of the BOCC. You know, I just remember the other day, I have a citizens advisory board, and they talked about ICT-1. Again, I didn't drive the discussion. It's true. They came back with some findings, and they wanted to share that with the Board of Health and the Board of County Commissioners. There was a number of recommendations to make that program more effective and more efficient. And the reaction from the BOCC was they didn't have a right to appear before us and give us, as a board, these recommendations. And those recommendations were, as far as I can tell right now, have been mostly rejected. So, you know, I agree that advisory boards are very valuable, and we want them, and I think that it's good that we have them. But when it comes to health issues, I think the discussion, in my personal opinion, I think when it comes to health issues, these conversations ought to happen in the public as much as possible. And I think in front of the BOCC, where we can hear all of the discussion, I think is better. That's just my opinion. And again, we've tried this advisory board, and we moved away from it. And if we're simply going to return back to what we had before, I think it doesn't necessarily solve any problems. Thank you.
Well, I have just one more comment. Thank you for answering that, Commissioner Howell. I think the point I'm trying to make is we're going back to revisit a policy that now needs to be changed. That's really the point that I'm trying to make. And we should consider that when times change, maybe it is time to look at the policies that are no longer in place, boards that are no longer in use, and could they be of use now? Pamela King Burns works for our health department, and during one of the forums, she said, "What does health and all policies mean to you?" And I was kind of taken aback by that because I didn't really understand exactly what it meant, but it's so simple. Thinking about health in all the policies that we create, from a 15-point dump truck system to a health board. I think as the Board of Health, we have a responsibility to look at every single policy that we put in place. So the policy that we're talking about with dispute resolutions, is that going to help our employees with their mental health? Are they going to be able to understand that they can go and talk to their supervisor about issues that they've had in their department? So health in all policies, would this board help us consider health in all policies for every single thing that we pass on this bench as the Board of Health? So that's really what I'm trying to get across. This is not a gotcha kind of board. This is a board to help us make the best decisions when it comes to the health of our community in all aspects of policymaking. Thank you.
Commissioner Lopez.
Thank you. I do think, just to make this a little bit more clear, when I talk about advisory, I think in our bylaws it needs to specifically state its role, which is in advisory in nature, that it doesn't get to tell us as the Board of Health what decisions we're making. I mean, this is not to limit anybody's freedom. This is to have a more informed process on making some of these decisions as the Board of Health, but then also they should be working with the health department and taking initiatives from the health department that they would like to see come, to fruition, that now they have a board to really kind of help push some of those initiatives forward. So I do think if we specifically state that in the bylaws, that this is advisory in nature, then we don't have to worry about them trying to tell us what we have to do and then have to be held to that, just like any other advisory board that we have. I do, to Commissioner Howell's point, think we do need to listen to the public, right? Like that's kind of the point of this, because right now we've had certain people come in and talk to us, but we haven't had an overall group of public people, from different sectors coming together to have these conversations and then advise us as they found that common ground, that middle space that they could find. I think that's really important. I would say that, I'm glad people are calling you, and that's great that you're getting their opinion, but we need to be doing more than waiting for someone to call us. I think I've talked to you over the last 3 weeks, and not because they called me, because I've reached out to them. I've talked to probably 30-some teachers, 10 school nurses. I went to a superintendent retreat where I talked to every superintendent I possibly could, or their representative. I've talked to Board of Education members. I've talked to principals. I've talked to about 50 business owners. So I have heard a variety of opinions and ideas and discussion around this. When I bring these ideas and this conversation up, it's not out of a one-pointed view. Like, I have heard very many people tell me why they don't want certain things or why they do want certain things. And so that's where I'm coming from, is trying to find that ground where I can hear people, and if there is a concern, that we can address the concern and not immediately stop a conversation because we don't agree on something. And I think that's extremely important. And I kind of look at this advisory board as doing just that, because we have commerce, we have customers of the health department, we have the medical professionals all in one group where they can really advise as a community much better than 5 of us can sitting up here. And so I do think it's important that we have that. And, I understand we're right in the middle of a pandemic, and so there's some hesitation on wanting to start this now, but I think it's important. I mean, if we look at the minutes from 2005 when they got rid of this board in the first place, I mean, they talk about what happens if we're in a pandemic. I mean, it's word for word. What do we do if we're in a pandemic? That was their concern when they dismantled this board originally, is how are we, as the Board of Health, as 5 elected officials, most likely with no medical background, how are we going to make the right decisions going forward? And they specifically talk about setting up basically a task force to get us through. Now, we have not done that. And now we are, 18 months into this? So I do think that we could start an advisory board and know that this is not an advisory board for COVID. It's an advisory board for the health department, for public health, and we can take that and really kind of come up with the mission and its statement and everything else together. And yes, they can advise and help with COVID, but this could go so much further than that. And, we might not have had the exact need for this before because, like I said, our health department was, a little bit more robust than it is today. So I think it's an important conversation. I think now we need to look at this because unfortunately, I don't know how long we're going to be in COVID. I mean, if we can't get people vaccinated, this could just be our reality for a while. And that's really important to remember, that what if next year we're at 50% of vaccinated people here? Then we're going to be sitting here having this exact same conversation. And so if we don't do this now, are we not going to do it then too? I mean, I don't want to continue to push this down any further when this could help us potentially find better ways at messaging vaccines. Like, they could work on how can we reach the community better if we have a variety of voices and people that, people can be on this that other people trust that maybe they don't trust us. So we can ask them, how can we message this better? What can we do to get our community vaccinated? How can we come together more than what we're doing now? As politicians, we are very divisive. That's just the reality of it. Whether we feel like we are doing anything to contribute to that or not, we are seen as divisive. So if we can have a group of people from our community come together and really discuss how we can overcome some of this, I don't see why we wouldn't want to do that or be very open to accepting that. They don't have to come up and tell us what we're doing is wrong or, chastise us in any way, but give us advice on how we can do better. Because I don't want to live this same nightmare for the next 18 months or the next 3 years. I mean, we have to change. We have to be able to pivot. I mean, I think that's a good sign of leadership, is to be able to say, okay, we've been trying it one way for so long. Now it's time to try something new because this isn't working. I mean, what can we do to change this going forward so it gets better for not just us, but for our community, so we can get past this? And I think this is a really good start in doing that. So I would love to see us start this sooner than past COVID. I would love to see us start getting some help on messaging and what our community really needs and what they would like to see from us, but then really work with our health department on what initiatives can this advisory board help you with? Like, how can we help our health department? Because, I mean, they need all the help they can get right now, and I think just medical in general is kind of at a point where they're just so frustrated. If we can give them any kind of helping hand, I think now's the time to do it.
Commissioner Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I got to reflecting back on the past 18 months while I was listening to all the other discussions. And if you look at what we went through for the past 18 months, I don't know how many special meetings we had, but it was probably almost as many as we had regular meetings. And so I don't know what the agility it would be of this advisory board. Because many times our special meetings were called less than 24 hours before the meeting. We had made the announcement. So I don't know if that gives this advisory board an opportunity to give us any advice as we move forward. I still recall the very, very first time that a order was put out by Dr. Menz. And 3 out of the 5 commissioners, I guarantee you, did not know what was in that order or that it was even coming. And several of us even asked the chairman if we ought to have a special meeting before that's released, and we didn't. It just happened because that's how fast things were moving. So to ask an advisory board to weigh in when even the commission was not consulted, the entire commission prior to that first order, I don't know how agile that this advisory board would be in an emergency. So again, I'm not opposed to it. I just want to bring that up as one of the things that's a strong consideration if we do have a board. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mind if I just kind of comment on that
Sure,
too?
go ahead.
I agree. Yeah, last year it was insane. I mean, watching it from the outside, I can't imagine how hard it must have been to keep up with how fast things were changing. The good thing about this year that we didn't have last year, we've learned a lot of lessons in those 18 months. Like, we know what to expect now. We haven't had any big special meetings that come up and things are changing right away. We see what COVID's done from the past 18 months. We've learned a lot of lessons from that. And I do think there will be times where we'll have to make a decision before the advisory board can meet and then discuss what they think is the right path forward. I'm not saying that that'll never happen, but I do think that would be few and far between this late into COVID. But then there's always those times if we have to make a decision before. I mean, they can always come to us after, and even if they're not, say, they don't agree with the decision we made. I mean, we wouldn't have to change our decision anyway if they had told us that before, because we still make those judgment calls. So I do think, I completely understand that, but I think because we have learned so many lessons over the last 18 months that we're just in a different situation than we were last year, and we could go forward with this now and not run into those same problems that you absolutely would have had last year.
Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a question so I understand what your vision is. Do you see this advisory board providing advice to our health officer or to the OMD or to the Animal Care Board or to the Regional Forensic Science Center or to the Health Coalition or to the mental health departments that we partner with, or environmental health? I guess there's a lot of things that are related to health. I'm just curious, in your vision, is this just Department of Health, or is this other aspects as well? Thank
Well,
you.
do any of those departments have boards of their own? Because this isn't a Department of Health board, advisory board.
Well, we're talking about potentially creating, in fact, I think we're moving forward on EMS advisory board. I don't know where we're at on that right now, but I do know that
Will that board
that's intended.
talk to all those departments that you just listed, or is that for EMS?
EMS is just for EMS.
Well, this would be a health
We have
department board.
Animal Care Board, that's true. Dr. Menz, as far as I know, he consults with other physicians, but he's not advised by any official board that I know of. Environmental health, I don't think there's a board for that. The mental health, I understand there's the Mental Health Coalition, which I'm not a part of, unfortunately. Regional Forensic Science Center, I don't know that there's any board for that. So I guess I do see there's opportunities that potentially they would touch. I do know that the Community Health Assessment, Community Health Improvement Plan, those are community efforts. They're not, the Sedgwick County takes the lead on those, but we do partner with other organizations to make those two things happen. So that is, already has many voices, I think. So I guess I'd just like to have it clarified exactly what the vision of this board is. Are they going to be advising Dr. Menz, for example? Thank you.
Well, I look at least the way that I'm kind of looking at this is just like the EMS board would advise EMS. The health advisory board would advise the health department. They can be a conduit to us as well. As I'm assuming if EMS board has something that they want us to know, they can come and discuss that with us too. I mean, I'm not opposed to those other ones that you mentioned that don't have an advisory board. If they feel like there would be potential to have one where they could get more out of what they do, I mean, let's talk about that too. But this would be a Department of Health advisory board. And, I've heard, especially last year when I wasn't on this side of things and I was just paying attention, from the community, that people were really upset that Dr. Menz was one man who was not elected making these decisions. So if we give him a board to hear from not just medical people, but the business community, but our health department, consumers, I think that helps him making his decision process. And I think it's easier for us to have a true understanding of what's happening in our community, because it's not just one man that's telling us what he thinks we should do, but it's a group of individuals that have been handpicked to discuss this from a variety of different viewpoints. And that's really kind of where those decisions would hopefully be coming to. So I think it's a good way to insulate Dr. Menz. I think it's a good way for us to have a better understanding than just listening to Dr. Menz And that's one thing I heard just so many times is one man should not be making this decision, and this kind of helps take some of that away because it wouldn't just be one man doing all of this. It would be a whole group.
Thank you. And I think the conversation was that when, at the time, he was empowered by the law to pass, if you will, orders on the things that people could or could not do, or the gathering limits, things like that. There was a lot of things that he got involved in. And as a single individual that didn't have an advisory board behind him, I do see your point, okay? With Senate Bill 40 that was passed by the legislature, and of course, I don't know what they're going to do going forward, but I expect that the conversation may come back to the legislature, but they've moved him more to an advisory position to the BOCC, or the Board of Health, I should say. So right now, Dr. Mins actually sits more into, he himself is more of an advisor to the Board of Health rather than empowered to make the law himself. So things have changed a little bit since the beginning of this pandemic, so I'm not sure where we end up on this deal, but Dr. Mins, of course, if he continues to have that type of power, I think the advisory board will actually be very good. That he would have that to help him. But if he's advisory to us only, then I don't know that he needs to be advised for him to advise us. And it's almost adding another layer. So it is a curious thing. Thank you.
Can I ask one question just to tag along on that? Dr. Mins, even with Senate Bill 40, he's still able to create or to put a health order out and mandate masks. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Commissioner.
So he is still able to do the exact same thing that he could. We just have to now approve it before it's.
And I can let Justin Wagner, who's also in the room, address that. But that's my understanding, Commissioner.
And do we also know when this will be going to the state to hear about what Johnson County did?
Commissioner Lopez, Justin Wagner, Assistant County Counselor. I'll take your first question. The Senate Bill 40, the way it's set up is that the local health officer can propose an order, and then the Board of County Commissioners would have to vote upon that order. So Dr. Mins could still propose an order, but it would not become effective unless and until there'd be a vote of the Board of County Commissioners in favor of a majority vote. To the second piece, I have not heard any update on when the Kansas Supreme Court would take that up. I know that the Kansas Attorney General has filed an appeal and a request for the Supreme Court to hear it directly. Usually it'd go to the Kansas Court of Appeals, but in this case they've requested to go to the Supreme Court. I checked last, I think on Friday, I hadn't heard anything new about that. I have not seen any news stories on that topic either.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Commissioner Dennis?
Thank you. I have a question, Justin. I don't have Senate Bill 40 in front of me right now, but as I recall, Senate Bill 40 is only applicable during a declaration of emergency. Isn't that how it begins?
That's a good question, Commissioner Dennis. It depends on which portion of Senate Bill 40 you're talking about. For example, the portion saying that boards of county commissioners and local health officers can't take actions that affect schools is only effective during a governor-declared COVID-19 declaration of disaster, which we're not under one right now. That's why, like, Johnson County did what they did and why they were able to do it is because there's no longer a state governor-based declaration of disaster in place. However, the portion that I was just talking about, that Commissioner Lopez had asked about, deals with public health statutes, does not deal with the Kansas Emergency Management Act, so it's a different part of the act, part of the bill, part of a different act entirely, actually. And that, under that, any order from a local health officer does not become effective under 65-201, if I remember correctly, unless and until it's got and it's certain types of orders. It has to be an order closing down business, changing hours of operation, setting capacity requirements on a business, things along those lines, that it has to first be proposed by the health officer and then approved by the vote of the Board of County Commissioners. So it really depends on which kind of action it is that's being proposed.
Okay. Thank you, Justin.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks. Been listening to a lot here. I got a couple of questions. Based on some of the other statements and consistently is, we've heard over the 18 months that we as the Board of Health aren't qualified to rule because we have no medical, well, we have a little bit of medical addition to our resume as a board, but basically that we're not. And then also, it's been said, Dr. Mins is not elected, and so decisions are made by people that aren't qualified and the other person is not elected. So my question is, on these other places in the state that have a board of health or a advisory board, are they elected by them? Are they elected or appointed?
The advisory boards are appointed by the boards of health. So and in those counties, the county commission sits as the board of health. And so they appoint or ratify the members of the advisory board.
Okay. So if we're going to consider even further, could we even consider, look into legally, Justin, if we could authorize a 5 or 7 person board to run as an election, get paid at something a month, and then they just can go ahead and rule on everything? And then the county that's had all this emotion the last 18 months can elect 5 or 7 people, and they can make the ruling.
And Chairman, and Mike, feel free to chime in.
might
Making
be
sure I'm
good.
understanding your question correctly. Are you essentially asking if somebody besides the Board of County Commissioners can be the Board of Health? Is that, okay.
As an elected body,
As an elected
they
body?
can run for an office,
Oh.
have the authority to be, I mean, we'd have to clear it with the state.
At this point, I think the answer would be no to that, just based on how state law is worded.
Okay.
The very short explanation is, House Bill 2016 we used to have a charter resolution that controlled as Mike described, who the Board of Health was and all of that. House Bill 2016 last summer not only reiterated the Board of County Commissioners, the Board of Health, but it also eliminated the ability for counties to charter out of that particular law. So the answer would have probably been a maybe if you'd asked me a couple years ago, but today I think that's something we can't do.
And I apologize for kind of catching you off guard with this question.
No, that's fine.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think we could, with a legislative change, maybe accomplish what you are suggesting. I know that in the area of fire districts, for instance, I believe the city of Wichita and Sedgwick County could have a joint fire district board and have that board be elected. I think that's been done in some areas, but it's not it's really not a unusual situation. There's probably states or places where they have an elected board of health, but that I think in Kansas it would take a legislative change.
All right. Well, thanks. My second, this board of advisory board, a few people approached me before this pandemic hit full speed, and we at the time decided to kind of wait and battle through it. Then looking at the history, I think it was abandoned, has been referenced before. The last time it was abandoned because there was another layer of advisory that there was already experts in the health department and the Dr. Mins of the world directly to the board. And so I think one of the comments from one of the previous board members was that it's not necessary when you've got expertise around you already. All that said, I think if we tried to get into a board right now, there's so much emotion going on that I'm not sure everybody has the public opinion, and even the appointees. I'm not sure that they're just like us. I'm not sure how clear all our heads are with this. These decisions are incredibly difficult, and somebody then you bring the emotion into it. I just think it'd be calmer if we wait. And maybe the final of the COVID, maybe the final world is half and half, and that is the new normal. I don't know, but I think right now I'm not really in favor of going further. I don't know what the board would look like. There's been a collision between medical and the economy through this whole thing, and that becomes another emotional piece that's very difficult to navigate through. And if the board was heavy on economics people or the business people or heavier on the medical people, I'm not sure that would be a real healthy environment to approach us with their decisions. But I respect what everybody's been saying. I struggle with trying to jump into this right now personally. So Commissioner Lopez?
Thank you. And just, I mean, to address that, I agree that this has been emotional. I mean, I don't think anybody in the community would disagree that this is emotional because we're talking about people's lives. I mean, we're talking about now the big thing that people are talking about is masking in school. So we're talking about our children's lives. So it's an emotional topic. But I do think if we can get a group that, and the way I proposed it is there wouldn't be more medical versus more commerce. It would be an even split. So they can have those conversations and they can bring what they come up with to us after having, professionals on both sides being able to discuss these topics. And they're not easy conversations to have. I mean, social media is so bad as it is, but you get on any kind of meeting where this is being discussed and just the way people speak to each other is just unreal. And so if we can get a group of professionals from different backgrounds in medicine, from different commerce sector as well, and we can sit down and have some of these hard conversations, I think it's really important. And I do think that can help guide us. But I do think it's also important to remember that, we're not in the exact same place we were last year. And so we've learned so many lessons along the way. And I do think that this would be the right time to do it because, again, if we wait, I mean, if this is going to be our reality, then we're never going to get through this. And I do believe that, having a variety of people discussing this can help us message this differently and, hit those conversations that maybe we just, from this, vantage point, just don't understand we need to have. And so I do think it's the right time. And I want this to also be clear that this isn't just for COVID. This isn't a COVID advisory board. This is a health department advisory board. And so initiatives that come after this, will also be started too. So this isn't something that's just going to be to tell us what we should do with COVID. It's so much bigger than that. It's all these other departments like corrections have these boards, and it really does help their department kind of go forward. And so I think, there are some components to COVID. Obviously, I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so it is relevant that they would be discussing that. But I think that they could really help us figure out the messaging piece and hopefully get people vaccinated so we can get past this. Because if we do nothing different, this is just our reality. We won't get past this. And if we can't figure out a way to pivot, then I don't know if we'll ever have an advisory board or if we'll ever be ready to have one because we won't be past what we're in now. So I do completely see where you're coming from on that, and I do understand, but I just want to be perfectly clear that I think this, not as a gotcha, not as a, they're going to come and tell us what to do, but just to even the simplest piece to help us message this, if they could help with that, that changes lives, that changes our community, and we should absolutely try to lean into that. So I hope we can get this going soon, and I would love to hear from maybe Adrienne on her opinions on if she would like to have an advisory board for the health department like other departments do. That might be really important just to get her understanding of where she's at with that and really initiatives that maybe she already knows of that they could help kind of start pushing or start having those conversations too. So that's kind of where I'm at with this, but I appreciate the conversation that we've had today. I've heard everything you guys are saying, and I think that I can adjust what I've been proposing to hopefully fit that where we can all walk away where we feel like, our input was put into this board, and hopefully we can make it the best that we can. But I do think it's time. Thank you.
Okay. If I just quickly, I have one thing I forgot and Commissioner Cruz, is that going back to the heightened emotion, it's very, my experience, even at the chamber level and others, is if you're running a business, your mission is to run your business appropriately. And with all of the watchdog groups and social media, if a couple of business people were on this board and really argued strongly one way or another, I could just see the social media crowd attacking that bar, that restaurant, that manufacturing plant, protesting that's happened over the last year. So I think it'd be very difficult to engage a business, a commerce side of the house to come out and share their true feelings and represent their business and their employees without having the repercussions have been ongoing, and until those calm down, I don't see a valid, an honest business person bringing their value to a board. So anyway, Commissioner Cruz.
Thank you, Chairman. When this was discussed last year, I brought this up in May, actually it was April of 2020, about sort of discussing this again. I do agree that probably wasn't the best time because that's the height of when all of this started. So I think it's a prudent conversation to have now. What I've learned being in government these past 3 years is that a lot of policy changes because of a reaction to something that has happened. Just like our dispute resolution, we are creating that policy because we didn't have it before, and we knew that it was necessary to hear our employees. That's one example. Roads get changed, stop signs get put in place. All of these things happen because of things that happen that cause us to react. So when would be the right time, in your opinion, Chairman, if, this isn't the right time?
Well, I wish we could have predicted, that when COVID hit us, it was supposed to be over in 60 days, and it wasn't. And I'm not predicting the future. I think when the emotion calms down on this pandemic, then that would be an appropriate time to regroup and consider and propose some form of a board, which I'm not really against because I liked it originally when I saw it, but it just was not the right time. And so, but it can be proposed if the majority of the commission want to step in that, then that's fine. I just think it's going to be very challenging, very challenging. So I don't know when the appropriate time is. Commissioner Lopez, or you can finish if you want.
Go ahead.
Okay, Commissioner Lopez.
I think that's a really good point to bring up that, we are kind of at the height of this emotional piece of this, but, I would argue that just politics as a whole has been an emotional, divisive, toxic environment for, many years at this point. And I think, COVID has really shown us that when we can't work together, when we can't compromise, then, there's a lot of bad things that could potentially happen. And so I do think coming together and being able to have hard conversations, if anything, helps kind of limit some of that emotional aspect, because it's easier to understand someone else's perspective when they're not trying to attack you with it or make you change your mind, but just try to give you another viewpoint. I think if we do this, whoever sits on this board, we need to make sure that they have a clear understanding of what could potentially come of this. I think we have to be very open. If you're on this board as a business owner and you give your opinions, regardless of which way they are, there could be repercussions, and I think we need to make sure that they understand that coming into this. And there are other businesses that have kind of their own little advisory boards that have come together over the last 18 months where they have these conversations already. So I think, it's already out there, it's already being done. I think if we can put it together where we can have, both sides of this really working on it in unison and being able to find that compromise, I think that's the best path forward. I don't think no matter what we do, right, we're not going to make everybody happy. That's just the reality of this role, but especially right now with COVID, no matter what we do, it's not going to be good enough for some. So finding more of that middle ground where we can compromise and hopefully limit the damage is done going forward is going to be the best that we can do. And if this could help in any way get that going, or even to be able to have some of these conversations that just are so hard to have when we don't have the structure in place, I mean, I think that helps and it moves the needle forward. But then again, past COVID, I mean, there's so much I think this board would be able to help our health department with. And again, I mean, I know I've said this already, but if we don't figure out how to message this differently, I mean, this is part of the conversation we had yesterday with the hospitals. They asked us, we have to do something different because we don't know, you know, we're medical people. We're coming out, we're saying what's going on in our hospitals, and people are getting mad at us like we're lying about it. I mean, they're asking us for our help and figuring out a better way to message this. Well, I can't come up with something completely new on my own, and I know that, you know, I'm going to be able to do my best in this role if I have multiple opinions from experts across the field, and I really think that this is a way that we can do that. So I completely understand all of the things that you guys have been saying, and I think that there's a way that we can compromise on a lot of those to make this work and what's going to be best, not just for the 5 of us, but, you know, for Dr. Mins, for health department, for our community. And I think that this is the appropriate time because we have learned so many lessons in the last 18 months.
Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Chairman. Just wanted to clarify, I'm not against an advisory board. I think it's an interesting discussion. If the board wants to have an advisory board in this role, I'm fine with the idea. I don't think it changes. At the end of the day, it doesn't change the fact that every decision ultimately comes back to the BOCC. And I do think that we have been very good at inviting many voices to come to us and help us through this time. It's always been that way. At the end of the day, there may be some disagreement, and maybe those folks that have strong opinions that are experts in that field may not appreciate the end point, but at the end of the day, I do think we've heard them. And one thing that makes us different, perhaps, than an advisory board, and by the way, I'm looking at the advisory board that we had back in 2001, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Mike Papoon, but I'm seeing about 8 folks on there that have a medical background and 6, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the other 6. Do we know if they have medical backgrounds or do we?
Commissioner Howell, I'm assuming they do not because they designated specifically all the other positions.
Okay.
That seemed like an unusual number of
But
medical
they
people
might
on
have
the
had it.
board.
We just don't know if they did or they did not.
Right.
But
Right.
it's possible they did have a medical background. We just don't know. But
Right.
at least the majority of that board did have a medical perspective, and so
Yeah.
it might be reasonable to think that there's a desire to be more aligned with, if you will, with a one industry in the community probably has a very good representation on this board, and maybe other voices maybe not heard as much. I don't know that for a fact. I'd like to go back and read the minutes, but I'll just this is a more philosophical discussion, I think, at this point. But I do think that we are connected to the people we represent. We are the people's representative. We are the people's voice in all things. And representative government says that we have someone that the people have chosen to represent their voice in all these discussions and all these policy decisions that are being made. That is what representative government does. And I got to thinking about this. I'm not an expert on bridges and roads, but we have to make decisions regarding infrastructure. I'm not an expert on fire issues, but we have to make decisions regarding the fire district. Some places have given that over to a fire board or a fire elected officials have created a fire board. I guess that sometimes is done that way, but we do that here. I don't know that that's wrong necessarily. I just think it's the way that we do it. We actually are the canvassing board. We're not experts in elections, but we have experts at the table. They know exactly what should happen in elections, and they guide us through the canvassing and certification of elections. I'm not a finance expert or a tax expert. We have experts on our staff that can help us with those issues, that come to us and help us with that. And then we're not property rights experts, but we have people's rights to use their property come before us all the time through MAPC. We have recommendations that come to us. We weigh those things. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't agree. I guess my point is this: we have a diverse background. All 5 of us have a much different background than each other. We're not all the same, and that's by design. I think that's a good thing. My experience in the legislature was that we had 165 members of the legislature. I think at the time I was there were no lawyers, no attorneys in the entire Senate, which is interesting because they're actually creating laws that impact all Kansans, and yet there were no attorneys represented in the Kansas Senate at that time. I served on the the House side judiciary, and I was one of a few members on that side that actually was not an attorney. And I think that my perspective actually really helped many of the bills that came through that committee, because I had a different perspective. And so diversity of thought and diversity of background is really, really good when it comes to representative government. And I just think when you get a majority of a board that's all given to one industry or given to a perspective, it may not be as balanced as what the people would want. And so at the end of the day, in the legislature, I look back, there was lots of teachers, there were people who had car dealerships, there were construction folks, there were homemakers, there were people who were retired, all kinds of backgrounds. And yet they're passing laws. How are they qualified? What makes them qualified? Because it's the people's representatives in government. And all the experts would come out. People who have strong opinions on both sides of every issue would come out and lobby those folks to see their side. And they would have to make a decision that impacted all Kansans. That's representative government. And that's exactly what we do here as a BOCC. So when it comes to Board of Health, it's not that I'm an expert on medical things. I'm certainly not. Almost everybody knows more about medical things than I do. But I am interested to learn, and I want to hear all the voices. When we have a policy consideration in front of us, I want to hear all the different perspectives. And we have to think about the economy. We have to think about employment. We have to think about mental health. We have to think about the impacts on this community in all kinds of ways, not just in one way, but every way. And so I think that having many perspectives and many considerations as a board of county commissioners that have to make decisions on health issues is not a bad thing out the door. We have the experts coming to us and the strong opinions on both sides of every issue, just like in the legislature. But I can't, to the question someone asked a minute ago, can we hand this over to another elected board? I think as long as they're elected, that's one way to do it. I'm not sure that's better. At the end of the day, I don't know that we've made any mistakes through this pandemic. I think we've done a good job. We've heard lots of people. We had some great debate, and the debate's healthy. At the end of the day, I'm proud of Sedgwick County. I think that Sedgwick County overall has done a tremendous job through the pandemic and on everything else. I think about our roads. We have the best roads in Kansas, I think, in terms of county roads. We have a very healthy budget. And on it goes. So I'm proud of Sedgwick County. And the process, in my opinion, it seems to work. So I don't know that we need to move forward to something different when I think we actually have something that works pretty well. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Lopez.
I really agree with a lot of what you're saying, Jim. And that's why when I looked at this and who should be on this, I wanted to make sure there wasn't more one side or the other, that there really was a good diverse group of backgrounds between the medical profession, from commerce, from schools. I mean, that's one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation today, is so I could get your input. If you think that the way I've set it up now isn't the best way, please let me know what you would like to add, and we can do that. I mean, this isn't supposed to be me telling this board what we have to do. I really want your input so we can make this board the best that we can. So when we talk about the economy or employment or mental health, like you mentioned, yes, let's make sure we get an expert for all those things on this board. That only makes this board stronger. This isn't supposed to be going against anything, but really trying to figure out the best way we can get the best voices from so many different areas of, whatever they're experts in, right? Like, that just makes this stronger. I really think that we agree very much on what you're saying. It's just a matter of finding out how to bring that together in the best way. So I don't think that we're saying anything terribly different here. Just we need to be able to figure out the best way to staff this board. So I would love to have that conversation. I'd love to hear your input on who you think needs to be on it. If the economy is your one that you really want to make sure you get the right person for, then if we all have our own person that we choose from the business world, choose someone who is going to be an expert in that can bring that opinion here. So when the conversation is had and we try to find that common middle ground, we have that expert too. It's not just medical. There will be less people on this board that are medical than that aren't. if there's 15 to 20 people and there's 5 medical people. So I don't think it's going to be one-sided or the other, but help me find that balance of what's going to make the most sense.
Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to have a question then. If these folks don't have an expertise in medical things, because they're not doctors and that type of thing, then I'm curious, what makes that board superior to the Board of Health as it currently sits? I'm not an expert. Nobody on this board is an expert on medical things. We learn. We have experts and strong opinions come to us. We engage them. We discover all the aspects of thought that need to be considered as we make policy. So what makes this board that's not a medical-based board, what makes them superior to the Board of Health as it currently sits?
Well, I guess I don't understand where your complaint is here, because it was too heavy leaning in medical, and now because there's not enough. I mean, I just don't know I don't know what your real question is here. I think that we don't have medical professionals on here, and we're the Board of Health. But I also completely agree that it can't be all medical people, because, I mean, when we look at public health, it's not just health. Like, public health is an overall wellness, and it's not going to be just doctors can't come in and tell you how to make a community healthy. You have to have different people from different backgrounds. You have to worry about the economy. You have to worry about environmental. I mean, there's so many things that go into that. So I do think it's important that it's not heavy leaning towards medical, but it is a community of different people with different backgrounds. But I think as the Board of Health, if it's going to be a health advisory board, there absolutely has to be medically trained professionals from different medical backgrounds that can, give in to these conversations. I mean, a hospitalist does something completely different than a pediatric family doctor. So we need to have a variety of medical opinions, but we also need a variety of commerce and economy and, experts in different fields. So we can find that best common ground on where we can meet in the middle and figure out what's going to work best for Sedgwick County. So I mean, again, I don't disagree with what you're saying. That's why I think it's important that we have these conversations to figure out what's going to be best to fill this board, because my background, obviously, I came from Ascension. Your background is different than mine, so we see it differently. So the people that I put on here might not be the best, group of people. I would love to hear who you would like to be on this and come together and find out how we can make that work where everyone's most comfortable.
I think to save from the back and forth, can you two just get together and have a honest discussion with each other? I mean, this is going in full circle, and unless you feel compelled that we need to do this at the bench.
No, I mean, I think that's fine. I do think it's important that the community hears what we're discussing,
Okay.
though, because this
All right.
affects us all, so.
Okay, Commissioner Howell?
I guess I'm not clear exactly what is being proposed, because I don't have a proposal in front of me. I don't know what's being proposed. And so I'm not giving my agreement to something I've never seen before. In theory, an advisory board does have value. I think every advisory board has value. But I'm not sure, as I sit here, I'm not sure this is a board of expertise. In other words, they have a heavy weight by medical people with medical backgrounds, or it's just a citizens advisory board, people with many voices, much like we have today on this bench. And if it's people who don't have that medical background, then they have to learn just like we have to learn. And again, I would rather have the discussion in front of the people and have a public open meeting and have those experts come to us and have that debate in the public with transparency. I don't know that we need to abbreviate our meetings here. I'm glad to have the broad and deep discussions in front of the people. So if this is a board of experts, then one of my questions is, are they advising Dr. Mins, and he's advising the Board of Health, which again, I think that's kind of where we're at right now, as far as I can tell. Or are they advising the Board of Health directly, and Dr. Mins is also advising the Board of Health? So it's a curiosity. I'm not sure exactly where we are. I'm not against advisory boards, but I don't understand exactly what problem this is solving based on what's been described just now. If this is going to be no medical expertise necessarily, some expertise, but not a majority, I don't see how that's different necessarily than what we have today on this board today. So thank you.
Okay. Any other comment? if I can wrap this up, I do think that I was on the call with the hospitals yesterday, and they are struggling with how to message, and so are we. I don't know why we couldn't pursue our communication department to reach out to a few communication people and just talk to them and see if we can, how do we message this better? That doesn't take a motion from us, but it's clear that hospitals are struggling. We're struggling with messaging. How do we get Yesterday, they said vaccination, vaccination, vaccination. They didn't talk about masks. They didn't talk about distancing. They just talked about how do we get vaccinated. So maybe there's a way, Hakeem, you can, and I don't think that takes a motion. I don't think it's a big cost. I don't even think there is a cost. I think some of these people would like to get together, and you could engage each of us as well to have an opinion about it. But messaging is definitely something that's right in front of us right today, and we struggle with it, especially when we found out that Denver does not have an increase, a spike in COVID cases or the Delta variant, and they've got 3 times the population, and they've got a 70+%. That's what they said yesterday, 70+% vaccination rate when we're at 50. So how did Denver get their people to do 70%? I think there's some answers of how we can maybe help messaging to our public to get the vaccinations. But I mean, people argue about the vaccination, but facts are if Denver's at 70+% and their hospitals are not being overcrowded, that's an important thing that we ought to mirror that if they've already figured it out. Or Tim, anything else you want to add? Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Commissioner Cruz?
The interesting thing about a vaccination rate is we're only considering people who can actually get vaccinated right now, which is 12 and above. So we have school starting this week on Thursday, which is a pretty big deal for us considering there's no remote learning available. So we have a whole bunch of children going to school right now who are not eligible for the vaccine. So when we talk percentages, let's get real with how many people in our community of 500,000 are vaccinated. Regardless of whether they can or cannot get vaccinated, what is the actual number of vaccinated people in our community right now?
So if we look at the population, or the vaccination rate for the entire population, we're at 38.2% right now. Of the eligible to be vaccinated, we're just over 45%, but it's a much lower number when you consider those kids that can't get vaccinated right now.
Okay. Any other comments? Tom, you got anything to wrap up, or Mr. Papoon? Okay. All right. Thanks for the discussion, everybody. And we will be at a commission meeting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Thank you.